Hey Fabio, how are you doing?
Good. How are you? Good.
Okay, so let's talk. We got through some of the questions in the other class, so let's go to the other questions from our online friends. Michelle, you're here.
Hi.
Right? Michelle? Yeah, okay. So if you're in person, you don't have to worry about sending a video question.
Oh, okay.
All right? So it's just for when you're home. So what did you ask?
I didn't really ask everything.
What's that?
I didn't really ask everything.
Oh, okay.
Just the cinema stuff.
Like something about cinema or what?
No, I just said that I'm just confused.
Oh, okay. This week's gonna be another After Effects thing, because hopefully next week the right version of cinema will be on the machines.
Okay.
So, Chloe.
Hi. I don't have any major questions this week. It's more like just little technical stuff that I still need to try to figure out a little bit more. So the first thing is this slight bounce back in the animation. So like best goes forward and then it moves back just slightly. And I know that was talked about in the tutorial video. And I played around with the Bezier handles, but I couldn't quite figure it out. So yeah, I think I just need to work on some of the little technical stuff more. And then with the fading animation, I couldn't figure out how to change the sequencing and keep the effects on the sentences. So again, just like a little technical thing, I wasn't sure how to change the order, because when I changed the order of which these things appeared, the effect, such as the fade by character and fade by word, it stopped working. So that's my only other thing, is just like the little stuff that I just need to play around with more, and just practice like the little technical stuff as well.
Good questions. With the bounce back or the overshoot, we talked some more about this today. If I go from here to here, and I separate dimensions, which we almost always do when working with, we're not moving it all in the Y, so I'm going to turn off Y just so we can just focus on X. And so here, we go ahead and do this and this. And it looks pretty good as far as easing goes. Or actually, let's ease in and out. And so we'll do like an S, right? The ease in and ease out is always S-shaped. We have a little bit of snapback or overshoot at the end. This is always because the line goes higher than the keyframe. Sometimes, depending on how zoomed in you are, you just can't see it. Right? If my window was only this big or had a really small screen, it'd be like, yeah, that looks good. But actually it's not. So when you're tuning the keyframes like this, it's a pretty good idea to hit tilde. Tilde is the squiggly line in the upper left-hand corner, and that makes this part full screen. So you can really see the curves. And then you can clearly see, oh yeah, that's past there. And so when I'm adjusting this one, if I want to make sure I'm not overshooting, I hold down Shift while I'm dragging. And that won't let me drag it up or down. Now I can only drag it out. So it'll greatly reduce your chances of overshoot. You could still get overshoot if you really crank this one, but in general, especially for an ease in, ease out, if you hold down shift, then you're not going to get the overshoot. And so that's what was happening with yours. It's probably just looked like it was just a little bit, but if you zoom in on it, it'll be more obvious. Chloe's other question here about the type fading in and out is that, there we go, we could fade in with opacity, or in the effects menu, I'm going to move this a line back over here or something. In the effects menu, effects and presets, we go to fade. You have your fade in and out frames, and then in order to fade in and out the letters, so let's say fade up characters, I'll apply that to this one. I'm going to come back to here, and the characters, this is actually, if you drill up here, it's under animation presets. And so this is more than just an effect. It's usually a couple effects put together along with some keyframing. And so it's the keyframing here that's the problem, because when you use fade up characters, it applies the preset keyframes starting at where you have your playhead. So if I apply these here, I'm going to go ahead and double click, say fade up characters. You see that nothing happens until I get past this point where the playhead was when I applied the effect. You can see this by hitting U. That shows us the keyframes, the default keyframes that were created here and here. They're actually created on something called the Range Selector, which we don't have to get into. But remember, U will always show you what things are currently keyframed on the layer that you currently have selected. Does that make sense for everybody? So if you move this, you need to move, depending, these keyframes, you may not even be able to see them if your playhead was way over here at the end when you made this layer. And you can decrease the amount of time in order to fade those letters in more quickly. So that was your issue there. Really good questions, Chloe. Those were both very keen. Everybody's volume is all over the place. Hold on.
Hello, Professor and fellow classmates. I do not have a technical question at the moment, but as I was going through the videos for the motion graphics assignment, something sort of stood out to me, and one of the speakers, by the name of Bezier, he brought up a point about collaboration, and in the video that what I have on the screen, he talked about that you really couldn't possibly achieve this as a single person. And I'm curious about that because I tend to work alone. Most of my work I do alone. Now, if there are other people or I'm obligated sort of in a situation to work with others, I would, but generally I like to work alone with my work. And so what he was saying kind of put a damper on sort of pursuing that career, because I'm thinking, am I going in with less of an advantage because I'm not a collaborator? Like, is that because I'm not familiar with the animation career process? And I'm just curious if that is essentially the most important to be a collaborator, and does that discourage me from moving forward in a career in animation, being a lone sort of worker? So I'd appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
No, not at all. So everything I ask you to watch is not a tacit endorsement of all of the views contained in whatever it is we're watching. These are, I think they're important in one way or another. It doesn't mean I agree with all of them. It doesn't mean you should agree with all of them either. So yeah, that guy Range is very big on collaborating. Collaborating is without a doubt super important, but it's not for everybody. Yeah, I mean, now I'll speak as an individual, not your teacher. Yeah, I don't work with a whole lot of people because I tend to be very picky about that. Especially when you're working out, when you're starting out doing this type of work. There's a lot of people who are interested in this stuff. And a lot of people have ideas about about animations they think would be cool to make or create or manifest. And once people figure out that you have skills surrounding this, they want to collaborate, quote unquote, which kind of means that they have some ideas and they'd like to see you make them. So that, I'm not super interested in that. I got a lot of my own ideas, and yeah. So, yeah, but everyone needs to learn that, sort of on your own. But yeah, we might do, most of the stuff we do is on our own. We might do something together, you know, maybe, I don't know. I mean, it's hard enough, the online, in person, everything else, like, I don't know, I'll think about it. Most of the stuff we do is on our own, especially this semester. So no, it's absolutely not. And actually, most of the work that you'll look at, not this week, but the week after, I'll have you watch another set of individual works. I think all of them but one are sort of the work of a single person. And yeah, the tools exist now on a level where you can accomplish so much more as an individual person than what was previously available in history.
I think sometimes when you need the collaboration, when you do a brainstorm for an idea, it's a good idea to have other people to talk. But yes, when you execute something, I like to be alone and just by myself as well.
Oh yeah, like as far as like when I'm making the thing, yeah, that there's no room for other people. Then, yeah, especially if you're doing client work for someone else, right? They're paying you for. I can't stress this enough. Write this down. You have a meeting with your client where there's feedback. That does not happen at the computer while you're doing stuff, right? Like this is totally separate from that. Please do not mix those two things. Like having a meeting while you're adjusting things and the client is there, that's bad news. Don't try to avoid that at all costs. It's not, always goes bad, very bad. Cool, let's see what Madison has to say. These are good questions.
Hi, this is Madison Lowry. I just wanted to ask a question about, well, not the bounce. I did get bounce to work eventually. It did take me a couple tries to figure it out though. I was wondering, it's actually further back on mine. For big and small, I did have an idea I wanted to do with it, but I wasn't really sure how to do it with just the plain text. So I wanted to convey weight with big over small, so what I eventually settled for is I made big just fall down faster than small, even when they were leaving the screen. I made it drop a little bit faster. I was wondering if there was a way I could make that feel heftier in some way, maybe like a screen shake. I don't know if that's too much, or if there's some other way to convey weight other than another squash and stretch and making it fall a little bit faster. Or if there's a way to, at least in contrast, make the small text feel a little bit floatier. That's all I wanted to know.
Madison, you're in luck, because that's all we're doing this week. So stay tuned. We're focusing on ways to communicate weight with keyframes in virtually every facet of this week's project. So yes, and we're doing it this week. And so yeah, I'll be talking all about that here coming up.
So I noticed that besides the online questions, there's no other assignments on the modules page. I don't know if you haven't updated the site yet or if there's not going to be anything else in the future, but
Oh, this is Lee.
answer that question. Thank you.
Yeah, so yeah, today's assignment, and then I wasn't quite sure which one we're going to do this week because I was waiting for Cinema 4D to be installed, and it's not. So we're doing another After Effects project this week, and then hopefully Cinema 4D next week. So I got a whole bunch of projects. I teach this class every semester. It's never quite the same. Keeps it interesting, right? So I have a whole like library of stuff. I kind of shuffle things in and out. You know, I'll try to give people more heads up, but you know, like the thing we're working on this week will be up, as we're trying to steer through this semester. So, you know, I come from a music background. I enjoy improvisation. I improvise a lot. So, that's it. This week we're working on, because it is up there now, Principles of Motion Design. Wait! Anticipation, squash, and smear. Am I still streaming? I am. Okay. It's just Ron on the chat. Hey, Ron. Whenever you start studying animation, the principles of animation become one of the first set of rules or principles brought to your attention, and they were developed at Disney as they were sort of pioneering all of this work. And so I linked to this book here. If this is, you know, it's not a required text, but if this is not in your library, it might be a good idea. And it's sort of detailed in here. However, these are particular to hand-drawn animation, and like I said, these were developed quite a long time ago. And as such, some of this stuff, it's not outdated, it's just sort of reframing it is probably good for working in a computer. And we'll look at some of this gentleman's work later on this semester, Jorge Canedo. He is his studio that he owns is called Folk, is that right? Not Folk, Folk, yeah. Ordinary Folk. We'll look at some of their work throughout the semester. Really amazing sort of After Effects based 2D animation work. You know, he's the primary.
When 5 engineers launched a company named
at that studio, but just really, really top notch. Primarily 2D based kind of stuff with like a real amazing attention detail to keyframing and motion. And so it's no coincidence that he has adapted those 12 original rules to these 10 principles. And so this is what we'll use as our sort of guiding GIF. This is our you know, GIF of record. And so he's divided them into 10, you know, sort of 9 motion-based things, and then you see 10, it's kind of the whole poster, the whole GIF, you know, appeal, visual appeal. All the stuff you already know about creating visual interest also being applied to these. And so timing, space, and rhythm, we've talked about this to some extent already, you know, frame rates, movement, easing, we've talked about this a bunch already, we'll continue to talk about it. Mass and weight, we'll talk about this today. Anticipation, moving in arcs rather than straight lines. Squash and stretch and smear, we'll talk about those today. Overlap and follow through, exaggeration, and then secondary or layered animation. So for instance, secondary animation here, the turn is an exaggeration, but then the jiggle would be something you usually label obviously as secondary animation, right? Jiggle, tails, those are all ideas of secondary animation, motion that comes as a result of some other primary motion. Cool. And so we're going to be making a modified version of this. I downloaded this before. There we go. And so we have a scene where we get a light impact and a heavy impact. Right? And so everything looks identical, but we're communicating how one is light and one is heavy, just based only on the way they move. We're going to have a scene where we do a light bounce and a heavy bounce, right? The ball on the right, more like a ping pong ball. The ball on the left, more like a bowling ball, right? And then we're going to work on this scene first, because I'm kind of reframing some of the videos for this to update this project. So I'm going to pull out the pertinent videos or parts of these from the raw recordings. The raw recordings are going to be up there on the live stream, but I'm also going to pull out the specific parts so that this is archived. So in the 4:30 class, we went over this sort of creating this from scratch, and I've got that one recorded. And so we're going to start here so that I can put that one up. The existing tutorials for the bounce are already pretty good. And so let's talk about this, and we're going to change this scene slightly. Maybe 2 separate balls rather than 4, just to clarify this a little bit. Sound good? Okay. So that's what we're doing this week. We got less time, right? So this is due on Monday, right? But I think we can make it doable. So let me get started with some, we'll call this squash. We're going to do 2 separate techniques for squash in 24 frames per second, 5 seconds. That should be good to start off. Maybe we'll trim it up later. And I'm going to go ahead, anytime we're animating, let's go ahead and create our shape. I'm going to hold down Shift to make sure it's not distorted, right? And before we start doing any animating, I am going to make sure that my anchor point is correct. The other thing is that we're doing the squash and stretch, right? So we're going to do a bounce with squash happening. We're going to do it a couple different ways. I'm going to show you an issue here yet, so don't follow along yet. We're going to discover something about this, the anchor point, right? And so usually when we're working, we're going to call this squash. We want to move the anchor point to the center, and so we can control double click on the anchor point tool to move that there. And now it looks like we're good to go, right? Because always get your animation anchor point set before you start setting any keyframes. Let's move forward and start this at about 1 second. And in order to bounce, we're going to need to set some position keyframes. I'm going to hit V, move this over here. And I'm going to make a floor. Okay? Don't animate things off the edge of the frame. It just looks bad for the most part. Everything we make is in a box. Try not to call more attention to the box. You want the box to seem like a window, not a box, right? And so bouncing this off the bottom of the frame, not good. Let's go ahead and make a solid and have this serve as our floor, right about there. And so now, if we start keyframing here, we're going to block this out, meaning you get any theater people, right? Blocking, which is where everyone, you figure out like, okay, I'm going to be over here, you're going to be over there during this part, and then you're not necessarily acting, you're just figuring out who needs to be where when. And so when we're setting up an animation like this, we can block it out. We're not worried about the details yet. We're just sort of getting the keyframes on the board. And we'll move this down. Actually, we're using position, so I will separate dimensions just from the get-go, because we're only really concerned about Y here right now. We're not going to move left or right. And let's move down here, and we'll move back up here, move back up. Okay. Okay, let's get some kind of bounce happening here. I'm going to go to this and make sure I grab all the keyframes and make sure I turn on Bezier handles so that I can actually curve these. Good. Let's see. Nope. Right? I'm decelerating as I come towards the ground. That's no good. I need to create acceleration on the way down and deceleration on the way up. So now, there we go. I just want to focus on this part. Every time I hit play, I don't want it to play the entire timeline. So two good shortcuts to know.
And B.
Yep. So B sets the beginning of the play area, and N sets the end of play area. This allows you to really focus on a specific point in time. So I'll move it over here, I'll press B, I'll move it over here, press N, and now if I hit play, I just get that part looping. If I want to adjust this later, I can use the B and N again, or I can just grab this or this and move the play area back. You can stretch it. Right. When you have a much longer timeline, this is really critical so that you don't have to, so it doesn't have to pre-render the whole thing to show you a tiny part that you want to see. Okay, so far so good, right? And so now we need to squash this ball. And what parameter are we going to animate to squash?
Scale.
Scale. So I'm going to hit S. We're going to need some scale keyframes here. Turn this on. And here's the moment where we hit the floor. And I want to be able to squash. And so that's going to mean distorting the scale. And so that means we need to turn this off, right? Because we want to be able to adjust X independently from Y. Turn that off. And now if I squash it out this way, looking good. And if I squash it this way, we get this issue. So the anchor point, that there's space here, right? Now my position keyframe isn't good, right? Because it doesn't hit the ground. And so the anchor point is important for rotation, obviously, right? Because it rotates around whatever the anchor point is. But also scale. It scales from where the anchor point is. And so this anchor point is not going to work for us to squash using this technique. We need to move it to the bottom. But like I've said before, I really don't recommend messing with the anchor point after you've animated something. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my keyframes here. So let's get the position Y and just get rid of those. And now start the process again. I'm going to go back to the anchor point tool and move it down to the bottom of the object, right there. And so now let's test it out. If I squash, okay, that still looks good. Now, there we go. You see it's scaling from the bottom of the ball. This is going to work for us. Make sense so far? Cool. Let's set the same thing up. Position, Y, move it forward. Actually, oh, another good shortcut. When you're scrubbing, hold down Shift. If you hold down Shift, it will snap to points where there's keyframes. Makes it much easier to change a keyframe by making sure you're exactly on that frame. You're not 1 or 2 frames off without zooming in a whole bunch. So I hold down Shift, I can snap right there. Let's move it up a bit. There you go. And let's go over here. Move it down. Right about there. And then come back. Kind of want to hit the same point. So I'm going to hit Control C and then Control V. Remember, it pastes to wherever the playhead is, just like if you're using a word processor, right? Wherever the cursor is where you paste stuff. Cool. Let's fix this one more time. Grab all of these and ease this and adjust these keyframes, just like we did before. More like so. More like so. There we go. Looking good. All right. Now let's go ahead and come in here to scale. And I'm going to turn on keyframing for scale and hit U so I can see if I shift click both of them or control click both, I can see both of them at the same time, which allows me to see my scale keyframes and my position keyframes simultaneously. Cool, so this one here, let's move this over maybe one frame. I'm going to hold down Shift to make sure it doesn't move up or down, maybe 2 frames. And when we hit here, in the real world, the ball would not smush until it hits the ground, right? But usually, having it pre-squish a little bit before is not bad, right? You got to remember, each frame is how long? 1/24 of a second, right? So real fast. So the difference between being here and being there, like, you may not even be able to tell. And so here, let's go ahead and scale this thing a little bit. Turn that off. So we'll go out this way and down this way. There we go. And then here we're going back up, but we need to return to normal. So Courtney, what values do I need to put in here to get back to normal? 100. 100. Thanks, Courtney.
You're welcome.
That's just Courtney. I know you know Fabio.
I'm sorry.
There we go. So here, there. And so this part right here, this is a squash. Right? We squashed it there. Let's look at this. Let's zoom out a little bit. Minus, minus, minus. Okay, not bad. It does seem like the squash is pretty fast, right? Like we can kind of barely see it happening. And so in order to really, right, we're going to squash and stretch. We're alluding to something that happens in physics, right, in the real world. But then we're also turning it up, right? So we're combining principles here. Squash and stretch, I guess, is the overarching principle. But exaggeration is a principle as well. And that we want to exaggerate this. And once you start to make it more cartoony, more exaggerated, it becomes less like the real world. And we're sort of amplifying the real world in ways that wouldn't happen. For instance, the pre-squash, right, is not something that would actually happen. And so one of the ways here is that in order to really get it to smush, we're going to extend this time on the ground. And so we're going to sit on the ground while we're smushing. How are we going to do that? We're going to duplicate this frame to extend this moment in time. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this one, hit Control C, come over a little bit here, maybe, I don't know, it's about 4 or 5 frames, hit Control V. Close. Let's look and see what we got. Oh. So this is like a mini bounce right here. That's not what I want. I want it to sit on the ground. And so I'm going to go ahead and just adjust my handles. I'm going to hold down Shift. That'll snap them straight. And so now this is sitting on the ground. Let's look at that. Better. Right? Now we can really appreciate the smushing because it's not happening in a single frame, right? We're there for a little bit. We want to exaggerate this a little bit. Let's give ourselves a little bit more time. I'm going to grab these. I'm going to hold down Shift, drag them out just a little bit more. And There we go. So that's definitely better, although it looks a little strange now. Right? We want our smushing, our squashing, to be at least as long as the amount of time on the ground. Right? So this is the amount of time on the ground. This is the length of our smush. So this needs to lengthen so that all of the smush happens while we're on the ground. I'm going to go ahead and grab this, or grab all of these, and hold down Shift, drag them over a little bit, and this returning to normal, I'm going to grab that, but anytime I click to select keyframes, I am dragging a square over the keyframes. Because if you click on the keyframe, it'll trigger other stuff in After Effects. Like you'll go into a different mode, or you'll turn on and off handles, or all this other junk. And so anytime I select stuff, I'm always dragging a square over it in After Effects. So here, I'm going to go ahead and shift drag this over a bit, like that. Let's look at this. Not bad. Better, right? But all of our deformation is what kind of keyframe? Not Fabio. What connects this point to this point? Anna, what is this? Does this curve at all? Right here? This green line, is this curving at all? No, right? These are, because by default, we have linear, right? And After Effects default, linear. General, this is bad, right? Because there's no acceleration or deceleration, right? In order to make it look more interesting, we need to add curvature to our keyframes. So let's do that. I'm going to grab them all here and put them all in this mode right here. Zoomed in too far there. All right, so over here. There we go. That gives us our keyframes, and that should look a little bit better. There we go. That's definitely smoother. Let's delay this a little bit more. Let me go ahead and shift. Too much, right? It's not, needs to be kind of up. It's kind of motivating the bounce up. There we go. And in order to exaggerate this a little bit more, when we get here, how would we make it smush more, squash more? What do I need to do to this keyframe right here? What direction does it need to go? Up, down, left, or right? Michelle, what do you think? How do I get this more squashy? Which way do I need to move this? Well, it's red, right? And so what is this? It is the what? The scale in which direction? X or Y? X, right. Everyone's got the colors memorized, right? Red is always X, Y is always green, Z is always blue. That goes for position, scale, rotation, all of them. So if we want to smush more, this one's got to go up. You can see how that's smushing more. If I want to smush down more, this one goes down. Yeah, like that's too much. More like that. And so let's do this again. Make sense so far? Ron says x-axis. Great. You got it, Ron. Nailed it. Cool. Does this make sense so far? How this is, when we did a bounce before, we just did the most basic bounce, where it's just this bouncing off, but we've added this amount of time during which we're squashing a whole bunch. If we wanted to exaggerate the amount of time we're squashing, we could sort of drag these handles out a little bit so that we spend more time totally smushed. That's pretty good. And drag this one out. I want both of those selected. Let's just look at the X here. Sometimes it's really hard to click on these Bezier handles. I want it to come back even so. Shift, move it over a couple frames. We're definitely into the world of nudging things a couple frames one way or the other. Not so much because I can see it, but as you're looking at it, you can sort of feel it. How moving something a couple frames one way or a couple frames the other changes the feel of something. So we got So what do you think so far? Make sense? Again, different from our bounce in that we stick to the ground for a little bit, and then we're adding the squash by separating, turning off the chain link on the scale, and smushing during the time we're on the ground. And what was the key at the beginning? We have to put the anchor point where? On the bottom, not in the center. Everybody with me there? Yeah. If this were a ball that was being shot up at the ceiling, and we were hitting the ceiling coming back, you would want the anchor point to be at the top, because we're going to smush up to the ceiling, and then come down. Cool? All right, let's take 10 minutes, sort of set this up. You may not get the whole way to where I am, but we're not going to get as much time to work tonight. I got to go through a little bit more. Cool? Ron, we're going to take some time to work. Feel free to try and catch up to where we are here. This is the third scene in our Principles of Motion Graphics assignment. Cool, great, Ron. Who else is on the chat here? I can tell there's 2 people watching, unless Ron is watching twice. Or one of you guys watching? Some people do that in the other class. They like turn the live chat on when they're here. Which seems strange.
I forgot how to break the shortcut that you use.
If you just click and they're not clicking right now? Okay, select the keyframe ones and press now drag.
This one?
Yeah, now just try to drag one of the Bezier handles on the wheel.
Drag one of those.
No, just grab, press the middle button, press the left button. Now try to drag one of the keyframes, one of the Bezier handles. Yeah, so that I've been creating the ease using that button, which automatically gives you both handles.
Okay.
So that can almost always on the do that. So
Yeah, I clicked on that, but I don't think it, when I just did it easy, it didn't break. But now it's good.
yeah. Oh, okay, Ron, if you're only drawing a square, you click and hold this tool to get the other shapes. So if you click and hold, that's where you can find the other shapes to draw. In order to get Bezier handles, you have to press Cool. You guys are coming along. Okay, save where you're at. Save where you're at. again, we gotta get through a little bit more tonight. So grab your notebooks here. Let's keep going. So, up until, or no, when we did the other bouncing ball project the very first week, I had you guys turn on motion blur to communicate speed. Which of these icons here is motion blur? This one, right? And so this turns on motion blur for the entire comp. And then you can turn on motion blur in each layer. So if I do that here, and just the one that's moving, I don't need to turn on for the floor. There we go. And if you look, you can see where it's blurring more, where it's moving faster. So right before it hits the ground, it's very blurred. Right after it hits the ground, very blurred. And motion blur helps you communicate speed. And the other thing I want to cover tonight is when you're trying to communicate speed, you have two options. One is motion blur. So you're usually doing one of these two things. And the other is smear. So this is important, right? What's a smear? A smear is the animation way of distorting. You know, it's more rooted in animation, where motion blur is more rooted in cameras, photography. Is anybody taking digital photo? Okay, so if you're using a camera, you keep the shutter speed open longer in order to have something blur. So here, check this. This side is nice. I'm going to put this, actually, I'll link to this. So this is a really great discussion of smears in animation as a way to communicate speed. So here you have Homer and everybody moving quickly, and you see that they are actually distorted, right? They're being smeared horizontally. And there's a really great, down here it's interactive. And so this is the clip, right? It's Flash and Superman showing up super fast, right? And so instead of using motion blur, they're using smear. And so here's, when you go frame by frame, here, there's the Flash getting smeared all over the screen, right? And there's Superman looking pretty fat, right? So they're scaling it in this one moment. These are really fast, like just a couple of frames, to communicate speed. Here is one with SpongeBob, where instead of distorting the object, they repeat to communicate speed. And so it's sort of distortion via repetition. And then it happens to Patrick right here. Right, we get the distortion via repeat.
Oh, what can I do for you two nice young men? We're selling chocolate bars. Would you like to buy one? That sounds heavenly. I'll take one.
Much longer than
one
the other
chocolate bar
clips.
coming up. Huh?
It's like the whole episode. All right. Anyways, so those are our two options, motion blur and smear. And so I'm going to add, let's use smear and not motion blur on this project. And so I'm going to turn off motion blur, I'm going to turn off motion blur. And we are going to use a adjustment layer to apply an effect. So I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. I'm going to make sure it's at the top. And the effect to do a lot of this smearing, right? This isn't the only way to do it, but it's one of the ways that works really well in After Effects, is the echo. Right? I wish it was just called the smear effect, because that's what you usually use it for, but echo. And so I went to Effects and Presets, select Echo, and make sure I have my adjustment layer selected. I double click, and I've applied it. Now, the echo parameters. Let's talk about these. This is the amount, let's watch what it does first. And so I just applied it, and okay. So let's frame by frame. You can see that there's an echo. There's a duplicate here that's a little bit further back in time. Just one, right? So you can kind of see This is close to what we were just talking about, right? But not good, not quite what we want. So let's fix it. We got this one right here. This is how far behind in time. This very top one, this echo time, right here. We have the how many echoes right there. And then this one at the bottom, this is how are the echoes combined or composited. Composited. There we go. Those are the most important ones. So look at this once. I have it where I want, and the first one up here, I'm going to give you a number, and you should pretty much always use this as a starting point. Negative means that it's going to go back in time, so negative 0.001. That's what I would write down, make a note of. I almost always change this to that value right off the bat, negative 0.001. Because this echo is going to do like subframe stuff. You know, I told you before that the frame was our smallest unit of time? Well, I lied, right? There are things where you can do things in between frames. And this is doing some interpolation in between frames to create more copies. That's better. Okay, now you can barely see it because it's so close in time. And so let's turn up the number of copies. I'm going to go from 1, and just to make it obvious, I'm going to make it 20 copies. So now, if I hit play, okay, now I can definitely see a difference, right? Especially when it's moving quickly. I'm getting a lot of tail to this thing. However, my ball used to be blue, and now it's white. Because all of them are being added together. The add blend mode makes things brighter. I'm going to change this to composite in back. There we go. Now I've restored my original color, which is what I want in this case.
What did you change it to?
Composite in back. Composite in back and composite in front, in our case, will give you the same result. We'll just keep it from either adding and brightening or doing something else. So when you are setting echo, this one should be negative 0.001. Use that value. This one should either be composite in front or back. In most cases, they're going to give you the same result. This one, right here, the number of copies, this should be season to taste, right? This is where you really dial in how much of a echo, how much of a smear you want to have in the animation. But beware, more echoes equals slower. After Effects has to do more work, right? It's not actually slowing down the animation. It's slowing down how fast After Effects can show it to you. And so it'll take longer to do the work. It'll take longer for it to preview the render. Everybody understand that? Right? So always use negative 0.001. Always say composite in front or back. But as far as the number of echoes, that's where you can dial it in. So for instance, I'll make the number of echoes like, I don't know, 80. See, it's taking longer to fill the green bar there. And now, yeah, it's really smeary, but you know, it's getting kind of weird. This is maybe a bit much. Let's put it back at 30. And look at it there. There we go. That's better. All right, we get when it's moving quickly, we're getting that distortion, which is what we're after here. So this is an alternative to motion blur. Right? Motion blur is one way of doing this. using a smear is a different way. Motion blur is more of a photographic thing. Smear is more of an animation thing, right? Animation meaning cartoon animation, right? You guys know from the assignment you did, I prefer the term motion graphics, right? It's a much larger umbrella that's over this entire genre of work, right? Animation is used by people often to describe cartoons, right? Cartoons are a subset of this thing. But there's a specific distortion that happens in cartoons. And this is one of those types of things, right? This is one of the principles right here. So we got a smear happening there. And so in this project, we're not going to use motion blur. We're going to use the echo to create smears. Now, like I said, the echo on these computers here at school, it's fast enough. It seems to be going pretty well, right? So I'm fine. If your computer at home is really slowing down when you put some echo on there, you can turn the effect off while you're working and then just turn it back on when it comes time to output everything, right, as a way to work faster. Smearing, one of our other principles in there, right? Sort of used in conjunction with squash and stretch. Any questions about that? Does that make sense? Okay, with whatever you have here, try to add the echo to an adjustment layer and play with those settings a little bit. Remember, the only setting you really want to play with is number of echoes. You want to set the other ones as I said, so that you have the right look and feel to it. So go ahead and give that a shot. You too, Ron, at home. Where's the other people in the chat? I feel like we've got not a lot of people in the chat tonight. And by not a lot, I mean just Ron.
I think I messed up my anchor point because I went to go scale. My anchor point says way over here. But at the very beginning it said it to
Yeah, maybe you control Z at some point. So.
oh yeah, that's undo, right?
Yeah. So go to hit P for position. Yes, like the ball. That's it, P.
Oh, also, another thing, you can't type. I was just typing that now it's messed up.
Oh, that's weird. Open something else and see. Right.
What was the thing?
Super weird.
I know there's a numlock. Is there one for?
Did you save already? Go ahead and
I'm really sure for
yeah, you can do that without a keyboard. But go ahead and restart the computer and then see if that's there. That's a weird one. That's good. All right, grab your notebooks. Let's add one more thing to this. So no, it's me.
Oh, okay.
There we go. My keyboard wasn't working for a second. Super weird. All right, so we made a bounce.
Was I just signing out, signing back in?
Yeah. Every time we sort of make these improvements to it to make the animation more visceral, this is often referred to as plussing, right? We're adding something more to it, right? And so let's add one more thing to this, right? The squash and stretch took it up a notch. The smear took it up a notch. Let's do one thing. Let's squash, but we haven't stretched. So let's stretch. Here under scale, we need to essentially invert. So here, we need to set this one in this way. So I'm making x less and y more, right? So that we're stretching in that direction. And then again, we need to come back to normal. So this one here, I'm going to Control C, then Control V here. And I'm going to turn off my echo. Why did everything get so pixelated all of a sudden? So there, now we see we got squash and stretch. It's stretching out in that direction. In this case, I think it needs to be a little bit longer. So I'm going to grab this one and move it over this way a bit. And now let's look at it real quick. That's pretty good. But if I'm looking at the keyframes here, before when this was the end of my squashing, that was fine. But now as I'm adding more stuff to it, this here, I believe that this hitch in the line isn't helping me. And so I'm going to grab some keyframes here to work with. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to use the tilde key to go full screen. And let's come in here. And see what it looks like if we just get rid of this keyframe. All right, that's no good because now we're crossing way up here. It's not going to work well. But let's just try and smooth this out a little bit. It's always not super easy to grab these handles. So there, see what I'm doing? Just sort of smoothing out this so we don't have this hitch right there. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. Drag these out a little bit to just extend the amount of time that I am stretched. Hit tilde, and here we go. Right, so now we've got both. We've got squash and stretch. Let's see what that looks like with the smear on it. I'm going to turn the adjustment layer back on. Nice.
What did you want it to do on the way down to?
Let's do it. And so here, as a way of stretching towards the ground, right? So now we're in the territory of not physically, we're giving the ball more character. It's reaching towards the ground, right? Not at all what the real world ball would do. So if we do that here as we're coming towards the ground, we can do the same thing. So I'm going to go ahead and set, this one is not going to be as dramatic, just a little bit there and here, kind of like so. And I'm going to move this one a little bit closer, move these over to the right a little bit. Can't grab anything, there we go, click and drag. And then again, most of the time we want to be at normal, right here. And so let's see how that works. Too short. I'm going to move this back so we start stretching sooner. And let's move this over even more. Whoops. Grab these, hold down Shift, drag to the right. And in this case, that little bit of pre-squash, I'm going to move this right about there. So let's go ahead and move this one over just a few frames. There we go. So now we got the stretch towards the ground and the squash and stretch as a result. Let's see what it looks like with some of the smear. Cool. Let's save, and let's look at everything together. Right, and so this is the story of our squash and stretch. Right? This right here, this is stretch towards ground. This is our squash. And this right here, this is the sort of stretch reaction. Makes sense? And the important parts here are that the squashing on the ground lines up with the time that we're sitting on the ground, right? So this more or less lines up there and there, right? You cheated a little bit here, but again, just sort of dialing in the feel of it as those two things happen. Sound good? Cool. All right. So there we go. So using our transform properties to distort the shape, let's look at another avenue. I'm going to make another fall over here. Let's give it a slightly different color. It's a way to differentiate this one. Something like that. And let's get our anchor point worked out to the bottom. There we go. And I'm going to set the position stuff the same. And so let's turn this on. Let's separate dimensions. Let's get rid of any X business. Just worried about Y. Let's try and get our timing sort of similar. There we go. So we're going to dial this down. Right about there. And coming back up. Right about there. So let's scatter this one. Control C, Control V. There we go. Let's get all of these and tune these Bezier handles. Do a little bit of the same thing. Great. This is the same as what I just did before, right? So that this is doing what I want. Let's look at another way to distort the shape. It's slightly different. And in order to do that, we're going to dial in over here. So I keep telling you guys what the shortcuts are so that you only see the information that you need here in the timeline. If you select these carets, right, these little triangles, this allows you to dial down. And there's a ton of stuff here. For instance, once you make a shape, there's all sorts of stuff here. We have the ellipse, and then there's the ellipse path, the stroke, fill. There's a separate transform just for the ellipse. And we want to, instead of using the scale to distort this, we're going to use the shape so that we can distort the shape as we see fit. Let's go ahead in here and dial down under path. So this is the important one right here. When this is an ellipse, it's like it's a primitive. And so we want to actually be able to edit this. I'm going to right-click on the ellipse path. You have to make sure you're on the ellipse path. And I'm going to use this one right here. Convert to Bezier path. And this now makes a path that we can adjust. And so now if I come back to V again, and I were to select parts of this path with path selected, you see that I get access by control clicking on a node. I now can adjust the actual shape by freely distorting the points that make up the thing. So once getting to this is a little tricky. Once you convert to Bezier path, you're in here. You have to make sure path is selected, and then you have to control click on one of the points here. Path selected, control click. Oh, okay, here we go. We want to be here, not here. Right. And so that gives us the Bezier points. Here, we can, this one is different. We have a path here. We can set keyframes on the entire Bezier path. So this is a little weird in that there's many, many points, in this case 4, but it could be way more, that are being stored in a single keyframe right here. These are all 4 of these points. And if we had a shape that was more complex, it would be all of the points. This is a little bit different about After Effects. So now, when we get here, for instance, let's keep it normal till about here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that path right here. And then at this point, we could grab this and start doing something like this. Right, so we're able to distort it really freely, right? So now when we hit here, this needs to be up here. This can come way out, like so, right? So we can actually distort in a non-symmetrical, asymmetrical way. We want this to maybe be a little bit over here, closer. So right before making right about there. Let's give it a couple more frames. So this is a lot closer to sort of Illustrator in motion, right? We have control over all of the individual points, and we can shape it just like we would want. Without, when we scale it, we're sort of stuck to the transforms that are available. And we can stay on the ground here. When do we start going up? So here, right about there. So if we smoosh out a little bit more, right, we're really exaggerating this one. And we could even sort of do this. Up. Making sure I'm in path over here too. These back. Sort of like so. So you see how this one is much freer, right? But there can definitely be more wrangling to do here. But there's a level of distortion which would not be really available. And so here, we want to get back to kind of normal. So where were we normal? Right here. So I'm going to grab this one, Control C. And right here, let's get back to normal, Control V. Because we're able to smear the shape so much, adding some additional smear to this may not even be necessary, in which case it could stay above the adjustment layer, right? Because anything that's above the adjustment layer doesn't get the smear, just the stuff below.
I put the effect on the shape.
So that's fine, because there's really only one thing we're putting the effect on in this. You would want to use an adjustment layer if you had multiple things. So in the very first scene, the impacts, in that one I put it on the adjustment layer because it's applying to all four. If I put it on each layer, if I wanted to make a change, I'd have to go into each layer and change it. Yeah. Whereas if I use the adjustment layer, it just saves me some time in terms of that.
We're following videos for this project, right?
Yeah. So I'll break these out into separate videos. So here, let's drill down. So remember, you got to have the just underneath selected to do the editing of the path, not the path with the keyframe. It's a little picky. How After Effects is. There we go. This one. So we could even do this, sort of move this one. Let's move this one in. Move this one in. Maybe take this one, square this out, so it's kind of. Kind of leaving that behind.
Because it makes it pretty cartoonish.
Very cartoonish, very. And we could do that on the way back up too. So, right, maybe here, this shape, move this one in a little bit, move this one in a little bit, take this one, maybe move it up just slightly, and do something like that. Okay. Right, so we can get downright liquidy there at the bottom by really squashing and stretching this one. Maybe give it a little bit more time to return to normal. Now the keys here, one, yeah, pun intended, I guess. Set position first. So accelerating towards the ground, stick on the ground, come back up, just like we've done, right? Then, two, you've got to drill down to the ellipse and right-click the path and select convert to Bezier path. Right, that turns them into points like in Illustrator that we can manipulate. And then make sure the top path is selected to edit Bezier points. You need to and be in Move tool, shortcut of which is V, right? The usual tool. the mouse tool. Make sense?
When you said about make sure the top path, you're talking about the top of the.
I mean, when you're doing the editing, you want to have this selected, not this.
Other one.
Okay? This one up here. This is one of those things about After Effects that's real finicky. All the tools change jobs depending on what is currently selected. It's very state dependent. You know, I'm not the biggest fan of it, but it's the way it's designed. You know, the tools do different things depending on what you currently have selected. And so you need to have this selected right there. This guy. This one. And you want to hit the major points first, right? So, you know, I got this really squished, and then I put in that extra sort of crazy part there. And then, yeah, this is, I feel like this could come in a little bit here. Let's see. Maybe if that even moved in a little bit. There we go. Right, and it could even be more. You see, I at least have 2 frames in between. You would probably don't want to go down to 1 frame, right? Because there's no tweening happening at 1 frame. And so this is one of those instances where, because this keyframe for the path stores the information for all 4 points. And so the graph editor doesn't really do anything here, right? Because what are the program is not going to show us all of those points on a graph, because you could do this. We're doing this for a circle. You can do this to any shape you bring in from Illustrator. You can bring it in and have access to all of the points that you used to draw that shape in Illustrator. And so that could be hundreds, thousands of points, right? And so showing them on the graph would be pretty much useless, right? Just be way too much junk. And so this is one instance when we're using the path where it's much more direct drive, right? I'm just sort of moving and editing points, much more akin to sort of using, you're just doing it by hand with a pen or something like that, versus using the graph editor, which we laid in too heavy for this one, right, to really smush the shape. So 2 different techniques to give you slightly different results. You can see how with the one on the right, it looks good, right? If someone turned that in, I'd be like, yeah, it looks like it's squash stretch, but it doesn't give you the same kind of control that the one on the left does. Make sense? Okay, so save where you are on the right, but let that one be wherever you are with it, and try and set this one up. Remember, set all the position first, then go in and convert the Bezier path to be able to edit that one. Okay, that's good. I'm recording. It'll be up there.
All right, thank you.
Okay, good. So you got the other ball there. Go ahead and put the anchor point at the bottom, like before. This is the new ball? Okay, yeah, exactly. Put the anchor point at the bottom. Michelle, that's your new ball? You want right? Yes, you want to put the anchor point at the bottom. You guys go into Y. Put the anchor point too. Y is the shortcut
And this one's due Monday?
Yeah. Yeah. You got a short week.
Okay. Alright, cool.
Set the same positions like do the upper position and the lower position and going back, and then you just adjust to the path, right?
You get all the position keyframes. So the top, the bottom, the sitting on the floor, and choosing the speed. So here's what my position keyframes look like for the distorting ball.
Okay.
Right, so I got it that far. Remember, every time we do position, we want to separate dimensions. Separate dimensions. So you right click on position and say separate dimensions. That'll give you more control.
right. Then I after I set the position, I go and hit the clock here on the path.
Yes.
Wherever I want to start modifying, right?
Well, before, did you already convert to Bezier path? Right click on the path?
Right here.
Right there.
Oh, Roto Bezier. Convert to Bezier.
Yeah, so select it again. I think you already did because it's already a Bezier path. It would say something else there.
By themselves. I didn't do anything.
You didn't do anything? Well, let's see if you can edit it. So go ahead and go to. Yeah, there you go. So now, yeah, you can move the points. You should be able to drag a point there. Right click on the. There you go. Select just the. There. Now right click.
Select them both and then make it right click. Oh no.
Let me do one that just to clarify. Here's the path. Right click. Right, so when you make a new ellipse, it should say ellipse path by default. And we select that and right click, and then the ellipse path should say convert to Bezier path.
Yeah, this is a thing like is going on my After Effects. I've done on other things. When I create a shape, it doesn't have like the ellipse path. It just creates the ellipse, and then on the bottom it creates the path all the time. Is it something that I have to change it on settings?
Not that I know of.
Because every time that I create a shape, it doesn't create on the content. It doesn't create the straight ellipse path. I have to add that, and then I can modify things, and then I can work on here. But see it create another ellipse.
That's strange.
Yeah, I don't know.
Try it again. Make a new shape. Let's drill down on that.
Oh, it's see, create like the ellipse, and then the path is separate of the ellipse.
Hold that. The fold down.
This.
Yeah, the one you just drew. Fold the whole way down. Unfold the whole way down.
I think we have to select. Don't do it. Going to
Unfold that one too.
this one.
Nope, next one down.
There. I don't know. I'm having. I was following another day as a tutorial on the internet, and it was like I couldn't make that.
That's weird. Let me see. I haven't run into that. Let me look. I don't know, Fabio. I haven't seen that before.
Yeah,
That's-
it's happening. I don't know why it's doing that.
Let me look here.
For me, and then for me to do that, I have to add, and then create it again the shape, and delete the ellipse one. You know what I mean? The previous ellipse. I don't know why I have to do that. It has something to do with the settings or something.
Okay, I think this is it here. Let's see.
I'm glad that I saw you here.
Okay, this is definitely it, but where is this? When a shape tool is active, you can use the new Bezier path option in the Tools panel to create a new shape based on a Bezier path, as opposed to the default of creating a new shape on the parametric path. I mean, what you have right now is fine because you're just skipping a step. But this, I think this is this step here, holding the Alt or Option key causes the opposite path behavior. If the Bezier path option is enabled, holding Alt or Option key causes the shape tool to create a parametric path. If the Bezier option is disabled, holding Option causes the inverse. I'm not sure where this enabling and disabling is happening. It says it's in the Tools panel, which is the default, which is this part here on the top. Oh, here we go. Right, so did I just not see this a second ago? I have this selected, and then here's the checkbox right here. Bezier path. Is that one checked on yours?
Where did you see it? It doesn't show it to me.
Like if you click on the shape tool right here, clicking on this tool, do you see this over here?
Shape tool here? Yeah. Oh yeah, it's Bezier path is activated.
Right. So you're skipping that step, right? So if you uncheck that, you'll get what I did. You'll get an ellipse path, I think.
So then I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna just copy the
Yeah, I had no idea about that. I don't know if that's new. I think it's newish.
I'm gonna copy the
Is that working for you now?
I just set the, what's his name? The position I'm gonna now try it. Yeah, changed. So now I click on, now I have the ellipse path one.
Good. So if you right click on that, you should have the option convert to Bezier path.
Convert to Bezier path.
But before you were just sort of skipping that step.
Yeah, it was going straight.
It was going straight to Bezier path, right? Because of that checkbox.
So and then, now I click whatever I want, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then create a path.
Okay, let me finish this part up here. So we can, this will be how we do this last scene. We will have the transform property squash and stretch, and then we have the path distortion squash and stretch over here. And so this one, actually, let's give this a little bit more. So now what we want to do is, I'm getting a loop right now because I've just set this up. I'm going to go ahead and center these a little bit by just hitting P for position and adjusting the X. There we go. Now, looping, right? It's looping right now because we set the beginning and the end of the play areas, but we want this to loop in when we actually render it out. So let's go ahead and do some adjustments here. One, there's some different ways to loop. I'm going to show you the way that I end up using most of the time, which is simpler than looping all of the keyframes that you would need. So what we want to do here is get this beginning and end of the play area, right? So use the B and the N keys. And if I look at all of this, I'm going to select it all and hit U. And I see all of my keyframes. And I've lined up the beginning to all the beginning keyframes and the end to all the end keyframes. Right? This is critical. So we got that set. And so what if we wanted this composition to only be one bounce, right? So that we can loop it. We can come in here to this one, right click, and this is a super handy command. Once you set the beginning and end of the play area, often you want to trim the comp so that it's that same length. And that is this option right here. So you just right click on the play area and you say trim comp to work area. And now this comp is exactly one loop long. Did I mess something up here? Let's see. How did I lose everything? Let's go back once. There we go. I had this extra time, so I'm actually going to slide those in and slide these back. And let's do this one more time. I think that was the issue. Right click and say trim comp to work area. There we go. Cool. And so now we have one bounce that's exactly our length. So how do I loop this when I actually want to use it? I'm going to come in here to, I'm going to make one more new composition. I'm going to use my 5 seconds, and we'll call this squash repeat. There we go. And I'll drag squash, or the one I was working in, I believe was squash 1. It'll be easier for you because you won't have these multiple versions. There we go, squash 1 in here. And so if I want to have this bounce multiple times, the easiest way is to Control-C, Control-V, and slide it over. And then Control-C, Control-V, and slide it over. Right? Each one of these comps is exactly one bounce. And so now I have 3 bounces. I can put my type in behind this, come in here and put in squash. There we go. This is probably a little big. And I can use some other slightly less dark background. Well, actually we're going to do that in the other one. Okay, that's pretty cool. But we want the balls to actually bounce in front of the type. And so I'm going to take the type and move it down below. There we go. And so now this scene is ready to go as our 3rd scene. Right? We'd use this one as our 3rd scene in I had to keep reinstalling my fonts here at school. So let's go ahead and just put this on. There we go. And a little bit smaller. There we go. We have looping, squash, and stretch. These are our 2 different techniques. So I pre-composed that squash, and then that was able to repeat. So the key is making sure that that this is one bounce, and then copying and pasting it will give you multiple bounces. We'll go over some other ways to loop things, but for right now, this is the simplest. There is no super simple way to loop something in After Effects. This is what I recommend as the simplest. Fabio, Anna, does that make sense, what I did here?
You just recomp whatever you had, and then you duplicate the layers and make more.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. All right. And so I'm going to pull this one out as the 3rd video. And yeah, we'll make a slightly different version of this in that it'll have the first 2 scenes, and then
I probably need to put one more keyframe here between 1 or 2.
so this scene will be the same, this scene will be the same, and this one's going to be slightly different.